We are going to talk about the rise of Rome tonight. We're going to go back a little bit to the history that we left off of a little bit when we were doing the prophecies of Daniel of the period. Understanding that the prophecies of Daniel stretch into the Roman period, and we haven't covered that history yet, but we're going to cover that tonight. If you look at your class plans, the rise of Rome takes up 2 classes in the plans, and then there's Judea under Roman rule. So there are like 3 classes that I've got built into the program on this topic. I don't think we're going to need all 3 of those, which is fine because we're still technically 2 behind. So that might catch us up a little bit as we go through the class, or it might not, who knows, because you just never know what we're going to get. All right, so the rise of Rome, understanding that when we talk about this topic, again, we're not going to be getting out our Bibles and reading from our Bibles because there's just not any references in the Bible other than what we've already talked about the rise of Rome, okay? I keep seeing movement. Makes me nervous when there's movement. I know it's you, Andrew. Okay, all right. But certainly when we looked at the prophecies in Daniel, so for example, Daniel chapter 2, Rome is in there, all right? And we looked at the other prophecies as well. Rome figures in, at least in a very minor way, in some of that also. So there are Bible verses about the rise of Rome, but it's in those prophecies. As we look at the topic tonight, we're really not going to use the scriptures to go through this, but it's something that we need to cover in order, again, to get us to understand some things about the New Testament period and the Jews in the New Testament period, which is not only, covering this is not only about getting us through the history, it's also so that we understand what the situation of the Jews was in the first century, which, remember, we're including that in the intertestamental period just for the sakes of this class. All right, so we talk about the rise in Rome. There we go. Okay. We talk about the rise in Rome. We start off by talking about the villages on the Tiber. And that isn't really supposed to be enigmatic, but the Tiber River is the river that Rome is built on. And indeed, Rome starts out as a village, as a series of villages on the Tiber River. Early Roman history is shrouded in mystery and legend, okay? There's just an awful lot that is just simply not known about early Roman history. There's a lot of legends about early Roman history. The Romans themselves made a lot of legends about their past. Nations tend to do that. I mean, after all, raise your hand if you think that George Washington chopped down a cherry tree. Oh, if you do, I'm going to, this is going to be their Santa Claus moment, okay? No, George Washington didn't chop down a cherry tree, but it's a nice story and it sounds good, and it's good as a national myth, okay? So you have some of this with Rome as well. Every nation probably has that. But Rome was supposedly founded in 753 BC by twin brothers whose name were Romulus and Remus. And you might see Romulus sounds an awful lot like Rome, and it does. Okay, the city of Rome is named after Romulus. But these are twin brothers that supposedly founded the city. The city itself grew from a historical standpoint. The city itself grew from settlements around a ford on the Tiber River sometime between the 8th and 10th centuries BC. Okay, so that is what period in the Bible? 8th to 10th century BC is what period in the Bible? It's the divided kingdom, okay? Or the Iron Age, if you will, in the ancient Near East. And so about the time you see kingdoms in the ancient Near East, you begin to see that these settlements are founded over there on this river in the Mediterranean that is going to become very, very important in the years to come. A ford being a place where you can cross the Tiber River. Okay, if you don't have bridges, you want fords. That's a shallow spot. That's where you can move goods, peoples, and armies back and forth. And so these villages grow up around that ford. The city of Rome was founded by a Latin tribe. It had more powerful neighbors, however, to the north. Those people were the Etruscans. Okay, so if you think Italy, you have Rome kind of in the center there. North of Rome is this incredibly gorgeous part of Italy called Tuscany, okay? I've never been to Rome, but I've been to Tuscany, okay? And I can tell you Tuscany is every bit as beautiful as people say it is, okay? That's the homeland of the Etruscans. So Tuscany gets their name from the Etruscans. They are a different people. They're not the same people as the Latins, okay? The Latins are going to form, this tribe is going to form the city of Rome. The Etruscans are a different ethnic and language groups. So if we have a map here of the Italian peninsula, about 750 BC, you have the Latins down here with Rome, and you can kind of follow that color shading there. It goes up along the mountains and goes down along the coast. This darker green area here are the Etruscans, and they expand into these areas that are inhabited by the Latins down here, so that the Etruscans, by about 750 BC, are controlling most of the northern central part of the Italian peninsula. Okay, the next image to share with y'all. This is an artifact, an archaeological artifact. It's called the Sippus Paracenus. Don't ask me what it means. I have no idea, but that's what it's called. It's a stone that has Greek script, Etruscan script, and Latin script. There's another stone similar to that was very, very important for deciphering Egyptian. Anyone know? The Rosetta Stone. It's the same kind of thing. It's an inscription in 3 languages, and that allowed people to decipher the Egyptian script that was on there. Well, this particular stone has Greek, Etruscan, and Latin, which are 3 very important languages in the Italian peninsula. Because if I go back to that map right there, what you don't see, because it is off of the map, is that, whoops, if I use the right button, hang on a second. Really got to use the right button. If you go off the map a little bit down here, and especially there's an island down here off the southern tip, off the boot of Italy. Anybody remember what that island is called? Sicily. Okay. The Greeks have settled all in that area. As a matter of fact, there's some, again, I haven't gotten to see these in my lifetime yet, but there are some fabulous Greek ruins in southern Italy. People go to Italy to see Roman ruins, and you can get some fabulous Greek ruins in the southern part of the country today. So the Greeks are there, hence the Greek script on the stone, Etruscan script and Latin script. This is an Etruscan tomb from Popolonia, which is in Tuscany. Ivana and I got to go there a couple of years before we moved here to the States, and we got to, because, you know, my kids just are used to the fact that I like cemeteries, and I never pass up a good opportunity to go through an old cemetery. And it's hard to get much older than that necropolis, that means city of the dead, there. And there's a whole bunch of buildings like that that are above ground because they're burying above ground, okay? And so they're significant in that part of the Italian peninsula. This is an artwork from the Etruscans. It's a sarcophagus, so the coffin, of a Etruscan noblewoman. It dates to 150, 140 BC. Okay, at this point in time, Rome is already dominating on the Italian peninsula, but the Etruscans are still there. They still have their culture. If you looked at that artifact without knowing that it was Etruscan, you would probably assume that it was what? Roman, because they're very, very similar. Okay, that's in the British Museum. You got to go there if you want to see that. Okay, next image. This is a Roman silver didrachm. It's minted between 269 and 266 BC, so in the Intertestamental period. This particular coin depicts one of those founding myths. There are Romulus and Remus, and they are being nursed by a she-wolf. Okay, this is an image that shows up in Roman settlements from time to time because that's what they believed. They believed that these 2 twins were abandoned, and a she-wolf came along and suckled them so that they survived. Romulus is eventually going to kill Remus, and Romulus settles the city of Rome, or founds the city of Rome. That's what the myth says at any rate. So you see that in some things. If you see Gladiator 2, Ivana and I were kind of debating whether to see that or not. We waited for it to be on demand, and so we watched Gladiator 2, and over the gate to the city, they have an image of a she-wolf suckling the twin boys, okay, because that's part of their mythology, and so it was used in the ancient world as well. All right, next slide. These are the 7 hills of Rome. And so if you go to Rome today and you have a mind to, you can visit all 7 of those hills. You probably will visit a lot of them if you're in Rome without realizing you're visiting a lot of them, because the modern city of Rome is spread out over that entire area. But you have, for example, couple that are famous. You have the Capitoline here, and you have the Palatine here. But there are 7 hills that formed the historical heart of Rome, and you have the walls then that went around the city of Rome. Okay, 7 hills. How many of you remember from Revelation who sits on 7 hills? Anybody? The harlot sits on 7 hills, okay? It is Rome. It is a depiction in apocalyptic literature of the city of Rome. That's the world power that is under view in the book of Revelation. And it's described in that way. And in the ancient world, that was understood, 7 hills, okay? Rome is the city with 7 hills. All right, another photograph. This is from the Palatine Hill. These are the excavations. Very, very old. Let me see if I made a note about that. I did. These excavations have revealed the remains of huts, okay, dating to the 8th and 9th centuries BC. So it's a very old archaeological site from the early years of the founding of the city of Rome. All right, so stages of Roman government. What goes on with Rome as a city, and how does it develop over time? The first stage is the Roman kingdom. It lasts from 753 to 509. There are 7 kings during this period. Okay, maybe there were more kings than that, but at least traditionally there are 7 kings during that period. So it's roughly a period of what? How many years is that? 250 years, right? Am I doing the math right? Yeah, 250 years. That would mean those 7 kings would have had to be pretty long-lived on the throne. Okay, so again, maybe there were more than that, but traditionally it's numbered at 7. Following the Roman kingdom is the Roman Republic. It dates from 509 to 27 BC. So Rome was a republic for nearly 500 years. Okay, it had representative assemblies, it had elected magistrates, and it had a constitution. So people were elected to these representative assemblies. There was a constitution governing how all of that worked. Then the last phase of the Roman Republic is the Roman Empire. 27 BC to 2 different dates. 476 AD in the west, 1453 AD in the east. Okay, the Roman Empire in the west, and this is way out of the scope of this class, will not be as long-lived as the Roman Empire in the east. When the Roman Empire in the east falls, who will it fall to? Anybody know? The Ottoman Turks, who are Muslim. All right? And that will be the end of the Roman Empire in the east. But those people, up until 453, considered themselves the Roman Empire, at least on that side of the Mediterranean. Republican forms remained in the Roman Empire. So you had senators and you had a representative assembly, but power was held by the emperor, okay, who was not democratically elected. We talk about emperors. The first emperor again is who? Anybody remember from one of our previous classes? It's Augustus, not Julius, okay? Julius Caesar was not the first Caesar. Augustus was the first Caesar. The empire is established in 27 BC. So, when Jesus is born, is it Roman Empire, Roman Republic, Roman Kingdom? It's Roman Empire, okay? And the emperors ruled basically at their whim. They made whatever decisions they wanted to make. What they said was law, right? That's the Roman Empire. It covers all of the New Testament period. The Roman Republic is still in existence during the Intertestamental period. All right. So I'm going to assume that if anybody has a question, they're going to raise their hand and wave at me so that I see you. Let's talk a little bit about Roman expansion, because we get 753, the city is founded. It's there on the Tiber River. By the time we get to the New Testament, the Roman Empire controls all of the Mediterranean. At its height, they will control how far north? They will control all the way to Hadrian's Wall. And they will build Hadrian's Wall. For those of you who are Scottish descent, you will love this. They will build Hadrian's Wall to keep those nasty Scots out. Okay, because they were one of the peoples in that direction that the Romans could not and did not conquer. So they built Hadrian's Wall. If you go to England today and you leave the city of London and you get out of the city of London, you can go and see Hadrian's Wall. It is still standing in places. There is supposed to be a wonderful museum at a place called Vindolanda. But you're going to have to travel a ways out of London to go see that. There's a museum and the ruins there along the wall. That was the northernmost border. So how do you get from this little tiny village that becomes a city on the Tiber to an empire that rules basically the entire Mediterranean and most of Europe, okay, for that matter? Well, let's talk about that. So the Etruscans are centered north of Rome. They're the first people that the Latins are going to have to deal with. The Greek colonies are also important because they're in southern Italy and Sicily. So you've got people to the north that are not friendly. You've got people to the south that are not friendly. There are also some other nearby tribes and cities that are not Latin. Okay? Latin, we think of Latin as probably what? Latin America. Why is Latin America, by the way? Because Spanish is a descendant of Latin. Okay? It's a Romance language. And so Latin America, its ties are back to that. But the Latins originally are just a tribe. There are some other tribes nearby that are not particularly friendly to them. So they're going to have to subdue and absorb these people, and they will. What's amazing about the Romans is the Etruscans are much more powerful, and yet the Romans are able to subdue them. The Greeks are much more powerful in southern Italy and in Sicily, and yet the Romans will subdue them. The other tribes and cities are not particularly important, but the Etruscans and the Greeks are, and they conquer these people. Okay? One thing, and I'll say this later in the class, but one thing to remember about the Romans is they will not always win, but they keep coming. Okay? Sorry?
It's your next slide.
It's my next slide. Okay, I said I would say it again. Alexander the Great, he wins everywhere he goes. How would Alexander the Great have reacted had he lost a battle? Who knows, because he never did. Okay, maybe he would have just, tucked his tail and run home because that was it. I can't keep winning. The Romans, they just keep coming. So when they're conquering somebody, trying to conquer somebody, and they lose, that's okay. We'll fall back, we'll regroup, and we'll go at it again. And so they just have this relentless expansion as they expand their empire. All right, so my next slide, Andrew. Again, not an undefeated advance. I already said that. I'll just pull past that point. The expansion was interspersed with defeats. Some were significant defeats. There was a defeat at Cannae in 216 BC. There was a defeat at the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD. That's already the lifetime of Jesus. Who defeats him at the Teutoburg Forest? Anybody know? The Germanic tribes. That Teutoburg is what's going to give that away. It's a German name. The general was named Varus, and the emperor would say in despair, supposedly, Varus, give me back my legions, because the legions of the Teutoburg Forest are annihilated. Okay, and that wasn't something that the Romans had a lot. They were defeated, but to lose their entire army like that was fairly unusual. But you know what? What are we going to do? We're going to regroup, and we're going to go at them again. Okay, and so they will subdue some of the Germans. They don't get all of them, just like they had Hadrian's Wall. I want to say the Rhine River and the Danube were probably the boundaries for most of the period between the Germanic tribes and the Romans. But they'll just keep coming. They just keep coming. They don't give up. They're very tenacious. Hence my next point. It's a tenacious advance. All right, so here's a map of the Greeks in Italy and Sicily, just to give you an idea. By the way, if you look at the different colors there, that's because these are colonies founded by different cities in Greece. And those different cities in Greece spoke different Greek dialects. And so these cities spoke different Greek dialects based on the mother city that they were founded from. But they're all down there. And by the way, the culture of Greece, what effect did it have on the Romans? It really took over, okay? The saying in classical studies is that captive Greece took Rome captive, because the Romans conquered these areas and eventually mainland Greece, what we think of as Greece as well. But Greek culture is going to be very important for Roman civilization, okay? And from them, it passes down to us today. All right, so I did say there are some important ruins in Italy. This is there are two temples here. One is to Athena, the other is Poseidon. That's at Paestum, Italy. So if you ever get to Rome, rent a car, and or take a train, but rent a car is easy. And just be prepared to be honked at a lot by the Italians, because that's how they drive. That's what they do. And if you're in their way, they will honk at you. I've never been honked at more than I have been in Italy, because I didn't know my way around. And, well, they made sure I knew that I knew my way around. But you can drive down to Paestum and see those temples. And they are fantastic, okay, from the pictures. I haven't been to those, But given what pictures are like in Greece, these are pretty significant. So you can see those. The Greeks had important cities and important culture there in the south. They're conquered by the Romans. All right, so expansion. Another period that's important to talk about with Roman expansion are the Punic Wars. Carthage was a former Phoenician colony which had expanded to form its own empire. Okay, so who are the Phoenicians and where do they live? It's Sidon and Tyre. It's north of Israel of the Old Testament. As a matter of fact, these are the people that supply timber for the temple in Jerusalem and other things as well. They are a coastal people. They're seafarers. They're backed up against the mountains. Okay? These folks don't grow a lot of food, but they make amazing ships. And they have amazing sailors who can sail those ships. And so they establish an empire in the Mediterranean, really way out in the western Mediterranean and along the North African coast. But one of the cities they found is called Carthage. And Carthage then eventually becomes independent and becomes an empire in its own right. So as the Romans are expanding, they've gotten rid of the Etruscans. Well, they've absorbed them. They've gotten rid of the Greeks. They've absorbed them as well. Where else do you go if you're in Italy? You go north over the Alps, or you start crossing the ocean. And the problem with crossing the ocean is the Carthaginians are there. And so they're going to wage war against Carthage and its empire. Punic, by the way, is just one of these weird things in history that it comes from the Latin name for the Carthaginians. Okay? So that's where that comes from. Again, these folks controlled much of the western Mediterranean. They stood in the way of Roman expansion in that area. So Rome is going to say, what? We've got to deal with these people, and we're going to. This is Carthage and its territories. Carthage is right there where the red dot is. They control areas of southern Spain, all along the northern African coast, and then some here on the islands and some in Sicily as well. So if Rome wants to go this way, they got to deal with these people, because these people control the sea. Right? So, photograph to share with y'all. These are the ruins of Punic Carthage. Carthage is later rebuilt. There's Roman ruins there as well. These are ruins dating from the period before Rome. And then this is the Tophet at Carthage. I just bring this up to demonstrate, to show y'all, a Tophet was a place of child sacrifice and burial. Okay? And several of these have been recovered in the Mediterranean, including Phoenicia. Okay? When you see Israel engaging in child sacrifice, one of the sources they picked that up from was the Phoenicians. So the Phoenicians practiced child sacrifice. The Romans made a point of telling them that. Okay? Telling everybody that. Oh, we got to get rid of the Carthaginians because they practice child sacrifice. A horrible thing, right? While the Romans were exposing infants they didn't want, leaving them on a hill to die. They have a long history of that. That's what Romulus and Remus are all about. They're left to die until the wolf comes along and, suckles them. So you've got the pot calling the kettle black, if you will. They're going to complain about the Carthaginians, but in Rome they're doing basically the same thing. This is the Tophet at Carthage. Again, there's several of those in Carthaginian and Phoenician areas. All right, so the wars, there are going to be several. The first of the wars is fought from 264 to 241. That is how many years? 23. 23 years. Okay? It is a Roman victory. In the end, Carthage renounces all claims to territories in Sicily. So if you go back to that map, let's see if I can go back to it real quick. Carthaginian territory, as a result of the first war, they give up this area right there. So Rome now has undisputed control of that entire island of Sicily. That's the first Punic War, again, 23 years. They don't get rid of Carthage. Carthage is still there. They just lose some of their territory. The second war is then fought from 218 to 201 BC. That's 17 years, with a gap of only 20 years between them. Okay? And Rome is able to replenish its population. Carthage replenishes its population. They go to war again. Hannibal figures into this war particularly. He invades Italy from the north with an army including 37 war elephants. How do you invade Italy from the north with war elephants? you cross the Alps. How many of y'all have ever been to the Alps? I've been through the Alps. They've got lots of tunnels in the Alps. Why do they have lots of tunnels in the Alps? Because it's really better to drive through the mountain than over the mountain, okay? Because they're really tall mountains. They've got snow on them a lot of the year. Some of them have snow all year long. And so now in the modern world, they've got these tunnels. There are passes that run through the Alps, but even those passes are pretty high. Hannibal, he says what? We're going to invade Italy. We're going to invade Italy with my army. And oh, by the way, we have those war elephants. We're taking them along with us. So picture this army marching over the Alps with these war elephants. The Romans are going to encounter something they'd never encountered before, okay? Because war elephants were generally used by Alexander's successor states, but not by the Romans. You got to have elephants in order to use elephants, and Italy doesn't have elephants. So this is going to be pretty impressive for the Romans, okay? So let me pull up the next slide. Then that's the second war. The Romans are defeated at Cannae, 216 BC. That was one of their major defeats. The Roman army is virtually wiped out. Okay, it's one of only 2 times in history, for the most part, that happened. However, the Romans come back and they defeat the Carthaginians at Zama in 202, and thus they gain control of Spain. Hannibal's marching all over Italy, okay, with his elephants. Meanwhile, the Romans are taking Spain. It's an interesting period of time. Okay. So if you think back to that map, now they have control of Sicily, they have control of Spain, they are whittling away at Carthaginian territory in the Western Mediterranean, and it is relentless. Okay. Think about how many men you have to replace when your army gets wiped out. And in the course of 14 years, they do. It's always amazing to me, and I've never figured out the numbers, how this works. World War I in Europe, we think of World War I from our standpoint. We lost, 250, 300,000 men, something like that, less than World War II. The armies in Europe lost millions in the course of 4 years. They lost hundreds of millions of men killed. You would think that would keep the armies of Europe from going at it again, right, for a while? Aaron's going to look up the numbers for me to get the numbers statistically, okay? 1939, they go at it again, and they lose millions of more people. The Romans are like that. They lose the army, and they just replace it. They bring in more soldiers. They train those soldiers. They put a new army in the field because they are relentless in their goal. All right, so this is a map showing Hannibal's invasion route. Starts over here in Spain. That's Carthaginian territory prior to the war. Marches up over the Alps, and then if you look at these lines down here, they're just going back and forth all over the place, okay? Terrorizing the local population, because that's what armies did. They live off the land, so they're taking crops and animals, killing people, defeating Roman soldiers wherever they can find them. Not a good time for the Romans in Italy. Okay. What number did you find, Aaron? What number were you looking for, Aaron? 15 million battlefield deaths? Okay, all right. So, the third war then is fought between 149 and 146 BC. Carthage violates the terms of its peace treaty and begins rebuilding its military. Their military's been wiped out. They've been told, don't have a military. Sound familiar? It's exactly what the Allies told Germany after World War I. Don't have an army. You can't have an army, okay? When Hitler decides he's going to conquer the world again, or he's going to conquer the world for his first time, he starts rebuilding an army. Carthaginians start to rebuild an army that violates the peace treaty. Rome says, we can't tolerate that. So 2 Roman armies invade North Africa. Carthage itself is captured and destroyed. The city itself is captured and destroyed. The survivors are sold into slavery, and the Carthaginian territory becomes the Roman province of Africa. Okay. So now, everything that Carthage had is now a part of the Roman Empire. They've expanded into Sicily, northern Africa, Spain, Sardinia, and Corsica now belong to them as well. So the Western Mediterranean is Roman territory. What do they lack then in terms of territory in the Mediterranean? There's only one more direction for them to go. They're going to go east, okay? And these things are happening concurrently, okay? If you look at the dates, I want you to note that. They're fighting the Carthaginians in the west. They're fighting the Greeks in the east. And they're losing a lot of people doing it, but they're gaining a lot of territory. All right, so Roman expansion in the east. The first war to talk about is the First Macedonian War, 214 to 205 BC. They fight against Philip V of Macedon, who is allied with Carthage. So they're fighting a two-front war. The war ends indecisively. Okay, no one's going to be their clear victor here. We got to put the war behind us. They put it behind them for a fat whopping 5 years, because then in 200 we have the Second Macedonian War. The Romans are fearing an alliance between Philip V of Macedon and Antiochus III, so Rome declares war. In 197 BC, Macedon is defeated, Greece is declared free, and Rome withdraws. But now if Greece is free, Rome withdraws, who's nominally calling the shots in Greece? The Romans are, okay? The Romans are calling the shots in Greece, even though they're not occupying that territory yet. Then in 192 to 190 BC, we have another war. This is called the Roman-Syrian War. Antiochus III invades Greece. Remember, Greece was declared free by the Romans. Antiochus III invades it. Rome invades Greece in response. Rome also invades Asia Minor and defeats Antiochus at Magnesia. If any of this sounds familiar, it should be, because we talked about it. We talked about Antiochus III. Antiochus is forced to abandon all territory north of the Taurus Mountains, which means basically all of Asia Minor now belongs to who? Rome. All of Greece belongs to who? Rome. Okay? Cynthia, let's get a mic to you.
This is just constant conflict and war. Do the people, and I'm thinking the people who are sending their sons to war, their husbands, whatever, are they okay with this because they know that they want to conquer all these lands? B, do they just not have a choice and they just have to send them? C, is this common in the ancient world so they just don't even think about it? Or maybe D, I don't know. What is going on with them that this never ends? Because I'm thinking, just in my lifetime, Vietnam or the war on terrorism, this went on 20 years. We're all war weary after this. What is their thinking on the constancy of this?
The glory of Rome.
So they're okay with this because they know it's the greater good.
I can't say they're all okay with it,
Yeah.
but it's the glory of Rome. It's
Arrogance?
pride, probably. A desire to expand an empire. Because if you're not the empire, if you're not your own empire, you're going to be a part of someone else's empire. So the best way to stay independent is make sure there isn't anybody that can take that away from you. So they become a superpower. How much the people themselves are in favor of this, I don't know. If you haven't, sorry to say it this way, but in the ancient world, even in the Middle Ages, if you have an excess of population, what's one way to cut down your excess of population? Have a nice war. Okay, it does have that effect. It cuts down on the population. So it might have been younger sons that weren't going to inherit very much, might have found a better path of gaining riches and glory in the Roman Empire. People who were not citizens could join the Roman army, and they would gain citizenship by being in the Roman army. And citizenship was important. If you weren't, it was better than the alternative, or a way to advance, a way of advancement, okay, in that society. If you were not a citizen in the Roman Republic or the Roman Empire, it didn't really matter which, you didn't have the same rights as everybody else. And so having Roman citizenship was a valuable thing. So it might have been, and I'm not real sure when the Roman government started granting citizenship for service in the army, but I suspect that was a recruiting tool. We do that too. We have non-citizens serving in our military with the idea that they're going to gain citizenship from service in the military. So that can be very attractive.
Also, they got land. Also, the soldiers were granted land that they could settle on. not just in that area, but like in Britain, all over the empire. So you're in the Roman army, then you had the chance to own land.
Yes. That was a part of the retirement package.
That's right.
Okay, we have the GI Bill. They had land grants and colonies. And so there are cities that were founded as Roman colonies, and all the people founding it were retired Roman soldiers. The service was about 20 years. If you lived that long, it would be about 20 years, and then you were done with your military service, and you would be granted lands, and you could farm those lands or do whatever it is you chose to do with them. And so there was a lot of benefits to serving in the army during the days of Rome. And they were able to produce enough population to carry on these wars. But it's a lot about the glory of Rome. That's a motivating factor historically for a lot of nations. It has been a motivating factor at times for us as well. So, think about Western expansion. Why were all these people willing to keep going west, even though there were people out there that were already there and didn't really take very kindly to you being on their land, and they would keep going because you couldn't have been one of those. No. Well, but a lot were, and that's how they moved west. So, all right. So, last point on that slide is that Antiochus' son, who's also Antiochus the fourth in this case, is sent to Rome as a political hostage. He remains there until 177 BC. We remember this fellow, right? He's the one that has and makes so many problems with the Jews. Okay, and causes the Maccabean revolt. So all of these things do tie together. The Third Macedonian War then is fought from 172 to 168 BC. It is a Roman victory. As a result of that, Macedonia is now divided into 4 puppet kingdoms under Roman control. Wait a minute, we thought Rome already had Greece. They had Greece, not Macedon. Macedon is to the north of Greece. Okay, so now that kingdom is divided up. 4 puppet kingdoms. They're all under Roman control. The Romans do this a lot. They'll put a client king on the throne and say, "You're king because we made you king, so you be very nice and cooperative." A very famous client king who's going to try to kill a bunch of babies in Bethlehem is who? Herod the Great. He was a client king, okay, under Roman rule. So he rules only because the Romans let him. All right, so let's see. Our Fourth Macedonian War then. I hope y'all are ready for the test at the end of class. Dates are important. 150 to 148 BC. There's a popular uprising. Rome invades again, defeats the uprising, and now no more puppet kingdoms. Macedonia becomes a Roman province. The Achaean League, which is in Greece, declares war on Rome. The cities are defeated, so you have these city-states that are still there, have some degree of still existence as city-states. Cities are defeated in 146 BC. Corinth is completely destroyed as an example to all the others. So if you go to Corinth today and you see the ruins of Corinth, those are not the ruins from 600 BC. Okay, there's probably some ruins that they've uncovered from then. Those are the later Roman ruins of Corinth. Okay, because it's destroyed in 146. The Third Punic War, the Fourth Macedonian War, and the war with the Achaean League are all happening at the same time. Hitler starts a 2-front war, and he's defeated. Rome fights 3 wars at once, and they come out victorious. Okay. All right, any questions about those wars? All right, 63 BC then. Syria becomes a Roman province, and Judea comes under Roman control. So now we have direct contact, not conflict, but conflict a little bit, but contact between Rome and Judea. All right. Our last little part to talk about is Egypt. Egypt is a coveted place in the Mediterranean. Anybody know why? Why does everybody want Egypt? Because they grow a lot of wheat in Egypt. Okay, the Nile River floods. When it floods, the soil is very fertile along the Nile River, and so they can grow a lot of grain. All right, so Egypt grows grain, And Italy, historically, cannot produce enough grain to feed its own population. So you want grain from somewhere else if you can get it. The later Ptolemies are weak, and so Rome becomes a de facto protector of Egypt. Remember Antiochus IV? He goes down to Egypt because he wants to take Egypt and add it to his empire, to the Seleucids. And the Romans don't have an army there, they have an ambassador there. And the ambassador draws a circle around Antiochus in the sand because he tells Antiochus, you got to leave. And Antiochus says, I'm going to think about it. This is the guy that was a hostage in Rome. And the ambassador draws a line around him in the sand and says, you think about it before you leave that circle. And Antiochus IV went back to his empire and left Egypt alone. Okay? Because he knew what the Romans were capable of. So Rome protects Egypt. In 30 BC, Cleopatra VII, who's the last Ptolemaic ruler, dies. Okay? And then Egypt becomes a vital supplier of grain to the city of Rome after it becomes a Roman province. All right. Further and later expansion is beyond the scope of this class. We don't need to talk about what they do in Central Europe or in Northern Europe. We don't need to talk about necessarily what they do in the East with the Parthians. This kind of gets us where we need to be as far as Judea is concerned, as far as how they're going to be in contact with the Jews. So just to give you an idea of the Roman Empire, this is not the empire. This is not the empire as it existed in the first century or as it existed at this time. This is at its largest boundaries. Okay, but most of that would have been their territory by the time Jesus is born, or very soon after that. All right, any questions about any of this evening? Nope. None. Okay. Did we finish early today? Are our bells working? I guess they are. They're going to ring in about 2 minutes. So, if there aren't any questions, what we're going to talk about Sunday morning is Rome or Judea under the Roman rule. Okay, that's going to have a lot to do with what goes on in the New Testament. So we've laid the foundation to get to that. One thing just to remember about the Roman psyche is they just keep coming. So when the Jews rebel in 66 AD, the Romans will just keep coming. It takes them 8 years to fully pacify Judea. The last fortress is Masada. It falls in about 74 AD. And the Romans are not going to let any rebels remain. They're going to go after everybody. They just keep coming. It's hard sometimes for other peoples to appreciate that. Maybe it's hard for us to appreciate that too. Sometimes a nation just keeps coming. They don't stop. Generally speaking, as Americans, we will fight long enough to gain peace and security, and then we're done fighting. We don't fight for the sake of fighting, right? Generally speaking, Americans don't fight because we like to fight. Not everybody's that way. Some people will just keep coming and not stop. So it's a little bit hard sometimes for us to understand. All right, so that's it for this evening. I'm going to go ahead and let you all go. The bathrooms are still available if you need them. Don't slip on the plastic on the floor. For those of you that are visiting, we're doing a major renovation of walls and painting and all sorts of stuff that's going on. It's going to look like that again on Sunday, but sometime during next week, I suspect they're going to finish up most of it. So